closer. Instead, the night after his funeral turned into something I never imagined. At dinner, my daughter-in-law fixed me with a cold stare. "It's time for you to pack and move on," she said, her voice like ice. My own son, my only child, just gave a small nod. I sat there in shock. The mahogany table where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays suddenly felt like a stranger's. The chair where my husband used to sit seemed painfully empty. Only a week earlier, I'd stood at his graveside after 32 years of marriage. Now the people who should have been my comfort were pushing me out. "Romy," my daughter-in-law continued, her tone polite but cutting, "this house is too much for you to handle alone. A senior community would be better. Activities, friends your age." I reminded her I'd cared for this home for more than 3 decades, that every corner held memories of the life Noel and I built. But she only smiled thinly. "Memories don't pay the bills," she said. My son Wade finally spoke. "Mom, Romy's right. And we've been thinking about starting a bigger family. This place would be perfect." The words landed like a slap. They didn't just want me to move, they wanted the house itself. I looked from Wade to Romy, the woman who had quietly distanced him from me for years. The room felt colder than the autumn night outside. That evening, I realized the life I'd built with my husband wasn't just being mourned, it was being taken. Wade finally lifted his eyes to mine. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw hesitation, maybe even regret. Then he smiled and nodded. "She's right, Mom. This house was Dad's, and now it's mine. You were only living here." The room seemed to tilt. Only living here? 32 years of marriage, of building a life together, reduced to nothing more than long-term house sitting. "I see," I said quietly, keeping my voice steady while my chest felt as though it might split. Inside, something deeper than heartbreak was cracking. The very idea of who my son really was. I rose slowly, my legs trembling. "I'll need some time." 2 weeks, Romy interrupted, her tone clipped. "That should be enough to find a place and arrange movers." 2 weeks. Not 2 months? Not even enough time to breathe, let alone grieve. 2 weeks to dismantle a lifetime. Wade finally looked straight at me, and what I saw was worse than anger. Indifference. Cold, casual indifference. "It's for the best, Mom," he said, as if rehearsing a line. "You'll understand." I climbed the stairs to the bedroom I'd shared with Noel, each step heavier than the last. The faint scent of his cologne still lingered. His reading glasses rested exactly where he'd left them the night before his heart attack. I sat on the edge of the bed and met my own reflection in the dresser mirror. A woman who suddenly looked older than 71, her silver hair limp, blue eyes dulled by shock. In just 14 days, I'd be expected to pack 32 years of marriage into boxes and walk away from the only home I'd known as a wife and mother. But as the evening shadows deepened, a harder feeling stirred beneath the grief. Determination. Noel had always managed our finances, but he'd taught me to be thorough, to notice every detail. Tomorrow, I decided, I'd begin sorting the paperwork and learn exactly what he'd left behind. If Wade and Romy thought they could erase me without consequence, they were in for a surprise. The next morning, the sunlight through the kitchen window felt different, clearer, steadier, as I sipped my second cup of coffee. 10 days had passed since that terrible dinner. The house seemed to hold its breath, waiting for me to leave. Wade and Romy had already visited twice, measuring rooms and discussing renovations as if I were invisible. Yesterday, I overheard Romy on the phone with a contractor, coolly scheduling estimates once the old woman moves out. I spent those days sorting through memories in silence, but today I was ready for action. The drive to First National Bank was familiar. I'd taken it for over 20 years, usually with Noel beside me, handling the accounts while I waited. He'd always said finances were one thing I should never have to worry about. Now I wished I'd paid closer attention. Mrs. Patterson, the bank manager, greeted me with gentle sympathy. "Mrs. Henderson, I was so sorry to hear about Noel." He always asked about my grandchildren. "Thank you, Helen." He spoke kindly of you, too. I sat across from her desk, my purse tight in my lap. "I need to understand our finances. Noel managed everything, and I'm not sure where to start." Her expression softened. "Of course. Let's take a look." She typed quickly, then paused, eyebrows lifting. "Oh my, there are quite a few accounts here, more than I expected." My heart skipped. Had Wade or Romy already tried to access them? Nothing wrong, Helen assured me. Just surprising. She printed the first statement. Here's the joint checking account you and Noel use for household expenses. The balance was modest but comfortable, enough for several months if I was careful. Relief swept through me. Helen smiled gently. And there's also a savings account in both your names. Another page slid across the desk, the numbers far larger, enough to sustain me for years. I left the bank with a quiet sense of resolve. Wade and Romy might think they'd written the ending to my story. They were wrong. That's wonderful, I said, feeling a bit of the tension slip from my shoulders. Noel was always careful about saving. Helen nodded. He certainly was, very methodical. But she was still frowning at her screen. Mrs. Henderson, I'm seeing several other accounts we need to verify. Some are in your name only. My name only? I repeated, startled. That can't be right. Noel handled everything. Helen's fingers danced across the keyboard. According to our records, there are 4 additional accounts. 2 certificates of deposit, a money market account, and, this is interesting, a trust established 5 years ago. My head swam. I don't understand. Noel never mentioned any of this. Helen hesitated. May I ask, did your husband ever express concerns about family matters? Sometimes clients create separate accounts to protect a spouse in case of inheritance disputes or other pressures. Protection? From what? I whispered. It's not uncommon, she said gently. When families are complicated, some people take extra steps to ensure their partner's security. I thought of the subtle changes in Noel these past few years. The quiet way he'd question Romy's spending, how he'd grow silent whenever Wade brought up money problems, how he insisted on doing all the banking alone, never allowing Wade to tag along. Can you tell me about these accounts? My voice barely carried. Helen printed more statements. The first CD has rolled over annually for 7 years. The second was opened 3 years ago. The money market account has been receiving small automatic transfers, $50 here and there, from your joint checking. Over time, it's grown significantly. The numbers blurred. These weren't emergency savings. They were life-changing sums, enough to buy a house outright, enough to live comfortably for decades. But I never signed anything, I protested. You actually did, Helen said kindly, sliding a folder toward me. Your signature is here on all the documents. Likely Noel brought you in for what he called routine updates, address changes, account upgrades. Perfectly legal. These funds are entirely yours. I stared at the papers, recognizing dates. The day we updated our address, after the house numbers changed, the time we switched to a new checking plan. Noel had hidden nothing illegally. He'd simply shielded me without saying a word. While Wade and Romy were measuring my kitchen for their renovations, treating me like a guest in my own home, I'd been holding a fortune they knew nothing about. There's one more detail, Helen added carefully. The trust account I mentioned has been receiving regular transfers from a business account for the past 5 years, the Henderson Construction Trust. That was your husband's company, correct? Yes, but Noel sold it when he retired. Wade said the sale barely covered debts. Helen checked the screen again. According to these records, the business account is still active. Consistent deposits, followed by transfers to your trust. You may want to speak with the company's accountant. Your financial picture might be even stronger than you realize. I left the bank in a daze, my purse heavy with statements and printouts. Instead of driving home, I pulled into a small cafe lot and sat in silence, reading every page. The numbers told a story Noel had never spoken aloud. He'd been quietly safeguarding my future for years. Each deposit to the trust matched moments when Wade had asked for loans or when Romy hinted at money troubles. Noel had helped them, but always set aside even more for me, as if he knew I might one day need to stand on my own. My phone buzzed with a text from Wade. The next morning, a text from Wade lit up my phone. Mom, Romy found a realtor. We can start showing the house next week. Hope you're making progress on finding a place. I stared at the message, then at the bank statements in my lap. They were so sure they controlled the future, so certain they held every card. They had no idea their plan rested on a foundation they didn't understand. Tomorrow, I decided, I'd call the company accountant. It was time to learn the rest of what Noel had prepared for me. The office of Morrison & Associates sat quietly between a dry cleaner and a tax service, the kind of modest space you'd pass without a second glance. I'd never been there. Noel always claimed the quarterly business meetings were just paperwork. Now I knew he'd been protecting me from far more than boredom. Margaret Morrison, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, greeted me with a firm handshake. "Mrs. Henderson, my condolences. Noel was a good man and a careful businessman. I'll miss our meetings." "Thank you," I said, settling into the chair opposite her desk, the bank statement secure in my purse. The bank mentioned ongoing income from the construction company. "My son believes it was sold years ago." Margaret's brows lifted. "Sold?" "No, not at all. 5 years ago, Noel restructured the company. He moved the assets into a trust, the Henderson Construction Trust. You're the primary beneficiary." The room seemed to shift. "I own the company?" "Technically, the trust owns it, and you own the trust," she explained. "Your husband was deliberate about every contract. Smaller jobs, steady clients, reliable income. It's been quite successful." She printed a stack of profit and loss statements and slid them across the desk. The numbers were astonishing. Consistent profits every year. "But Noel retired," I said weakly. "He stepped back from daily work," Margaret replied, "but he remained in charge of strategy. Day-to-day operations are handled by Tom Bradley, someone you know well, I believe." I nodded, remembering the longtime foreman who'd stood quietly at the funeral, grief written all over his face. "Tom receives a percentage of profits as a performance bonus," Margaret continued. "Noel designed it that way, to keep him motivated and loyal. It's been a very effective partnership." I looked at the figures, hands trembling. "Why didn't Noel tell me?" Margaret hesitated. "This may be delicate, but Noel worried about family pressures. He mentioned your son's financial troubles, and your daughter-in-law's spending habits. He feared that if the family knew about ongoing income, there would be expectations, requests, that could endanger your security." The puzzle pieces locked into place. Every time Wade asked for a loan, every time Romy commented on how comfortable we seemed, Noel had been quietly balancing help for our son with a plan to protect me. "He was protecting me," I whispered. "He was protecting both of you," Margaret said gently. "The loans he gave Wade were drawn from the business operating account, not your personal assets. And Noel documented everything." She opened another folder. "Here are copies of every loan agreement, payment schedules, interest rates, all formal, all legally binding." I left the office carrying evidence of my husband's foresight. A thriving company, secure trust funds, and detailed records proving that, while Wade and Romy schemed to take my home, Noel had spent years safeguarding my independence. The grief for my husband remained sharp as ever, but beneath it grew something stronger. Quiet, unshakable resolve. I opened the folder with shaking hands. Page after page of loan agreements stared back at me, each signed by both Noel and Wade. The totals were staggering, tens of thousands over the last 5 years, all for Wade's so-called business ventures. "Has my son been making payments?" I asked, though I already sensed the answer. Margaret's lips pressed together. "According to the schedule, he's badly behind. With accumulated interest, the balance is about $87,000. The figure hit like a physical blow. Wade owed the family business, my business, nearly $90,000, all while claiming his father had left nothing but debt. "What happens to those loans now?" I managed. "They transfer with the business assets," Margaret said gently. "As trustee and beneficiary, you have the right to enforce repayment or renegotiate the terms." I picture Wade and Romy strolling through my kitchen, measuring for renovations, so sure the house and everything else would soon be theirs. "There's something else," Margaret added carefully. "Last month your son contacted me. He said that after his father's passing, he'd be taking over management of the company. He asked for transfer of ownership documents. I told him I'd need written authorization from the trust beneficiary, you. He seemed surprised you were involved at all. So Wade had planned to claim the company as easily as the house, counting on my grief to keep me silent. The realization cut deeper than I thought possible. "Margaret," I said, voice steady now, "if I keep the current structure and let Tom continue managing operations, is that feasible?" "Absolutely," she replied. "Tom has been hoping you'd reach out. He's loyal and very capable." I gathered the papers, my mind racing. The company was mine. Wade's debt was real and enforceable, and neither he nor Romy had a clue. "I'd like to meet with Tom as soon as possible," I said, "and I need to know every option for the outstanding loans." "Of course." I'll call him this afternoon, Margaret promised, and everything we've discussed remains confidential. Driving home, my phone buzzed with a new message from Romy. Myrtle, the realtor wants to schedule a photographer tomorrow. Please have the house clean and decluttered. First impressions matter. I stared at the text, then slipped the phone back into my bag without replying. Let them plan their grand reveal. They had no idea the ground beneath their dreams was already cracking. That evening, I sat in Noel's study for the first time since his passing, surrounded by his perfectly organized files. Now I understood his insistence on careful documentation. He'd been building a fortress around me, brick by brick. The next morning, Tom Bradley joined me at the kitchen table. At 55, he still had the strong hands of a man who'd spent a lifetime building, but there was a new heaviness in his eyes. Mrs. Henderson, he said quietly, fingers wrapped around a coffee mug. I've been worried sick since Mr. Noel passed. Last week, Wade came to the job site talking about evaluating assets and streamlining operations. It didn't sound good for any of us. What exactly did my son say? I asked, steadying myself as I poured another cup. He claimed the family was in financial trouble and that tough decisions were coming. He wanted a full list of contracts, equipment, cash flow projections. He even asked for the keys to the equipment yard and the office. And what did you tell him? Tom's jaw tightened. I told him what Mr. Noel always told me, that if anything happened, I was to wait for proper instructions from the legal owner. I set my cup down and met Tom's gaze. At last I knew exactly who that owner was. Tom met my eyes. He never said it would be Wade. Relief washed through me. Noel had planned for this moment, making sure Tom would guard the business rather than hand it to anyone who merely claimed authority. Tom, I need your word this stays between us for now. You have it, ma'am, he said, his face turning serious. I spread out the documents Margaret had given me. Henderson Construction belongs to me, not Wade, not the estate. Noel placed everything in a trust 5 years ago, and I'm the sole beneficiary. Tom studied the papers, eyebrows lifting. Well, Mr. Noel was always 3 steps ahead. Yes, I said, and thanks to your work, the company's thriving. A quiet pride flickered across his features. We've built a strong reputation, steady clients, fair prices. Mr. Noel always said repeat customers are worth more than any one big contract. I want you to keep running things exactly as you have, I told him. But I need the truth about Wade's visits. Tom's expression darkened. He's come by when Mr. Noel wasn't around, asking about cash flow, wanting details on incoming payments. Once, the same day we deposited a large check from the Morrison project, he showed up at the bank. Claimed it was coincidence, but he sure asked a lot of questions about that deposit. My stomach tightened. Wade had been watching the business income, timing his requests for loans to when the cash was strongest. Do you think he knows how much money flows through this company? I asked. Tom paused, thoughtful. He suspects it's more than the family lets on, but I doubt he knows the full picture. Mr. Noel kept business and personal finances strictly separate. When Wade asked for help, Noel would claim margins were tight, then quietly arrange a loan from the business account, always documented but never enforced. Tom pulled a worn notebook from his pocket. I track everything. Over the past 5 years, Wade's received about $93,000, all structured as loans on paper, but he's missed payments, and Noel never pressed. So Wade acts as if he owes nothing. Tom nodded. Whether he believes that or just pretends, I can't say. A car door slammed outside. Through the kitchen window, I saw Wade's SUV behind Tom's truck. That's my son, I said quietly. I don't want him to know we've been discussing the business. Tom quickly gathered the documents. Whatever you decide, Mrs. Henderson, you have my full support. Mr. Noel trusted you with everything. That's good enough for me. Wade walked in without knocking, something that once would have irritated Noel, but that I'd grown used to. Morning, Mom, he said, barely glancing at Tom. Didn't expect company. Tom stopped by to check on me, I replied smoothly. You know how thoughtful he is. Right, Wade said, his eyes scanning the kitchen as if he were sizing it up for a sales listing. Actually, Tom, I'm glad you're here. We need to talk about the business. Tom kept his face neutral. Oh? With Dad gone, there are going to be some changes, Wade continued, his voice casual, almost cheerful. The family needs to make practical decisions about assets and obligations. I watched, fascinated. Wade spoke with absolute confidence, as though ownership were already his. Tom asked evenly, "What kind of changes?" "Well," Wade said, "we'll need to evaluate whether to keep operations running or liquidate assets and settle debts." "I see," Tom replied, his tone mild. "And who exactly will be making those decisions?" I said nothing, letting the silence stretch, knowing Wade was about to discover he held no authority at all. Wade blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "Family, of course," he said. "I'll be handling Dad's business affairs from here on. Will you now?" Tom's voice stayed polite, but I caught the faint emphasis on you. "Mom, maybe you could make some fresh coffee," Wade added, waving me off as he always did when important conversations began. But I didn't move. For the first time in years, I stood my ground. "I'll stay, thank you. This is my kitchen, and Tom is my guest." Wade looked surprised, then shrugged. "Fine. Tom, I need a full inventory of equipment, vehicles, contracts, everything. I also need access to the business accounts." "I'd be happy to help," Tom said evenly. "Who should I coordinate with for authorization?" "With me, obviously." "And you have legal authority to access the Henderson construction accounts?" Tom asked, his voice calm. Wade's confidence wavered. "Because I'm Noel Henderson's son and heir, of course." "I see. And do you have documentation granting that authority?" The old kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. Color rose in Wade's face as irritation warred with doubt. "Look, Tom," he said, slipping into that condescending tone he used when challenged. "This isn't a hostile takeover. I'm trying to wrap up Dad's affairs and take care of everyone. But I can't do that if you make things difficult." "I'm only asking who I'm supposed to take instructions from," Tom replied calmly. "Your father was clear about proper procedures." Wade turned to me, expecting support. "Mom, tell Tom I'm handling Dad's business matters. I met my son's gaze. This man who planned to sell my house and who owed the company nearly $90,000, and made my choice." "Actually, Wade, I agree with Tom," I said softly. "Your father was always careful. Proper documentation is essential." Wade stared at me as if I'd started speaking another language. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about making sure everything is handled legally." "Surely you understand the importance of that." For the first time, uncertainty crept across his face. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't in years. Power. 3 days later, the call came at 7 a.m., exactly when I expected it. "Mom, we need to talk." "Now," Wade snapped. "Romy and I are coming over." "It's rather early, don't you think?" "This can't wait." "We'll be there in 20 minutes." The line went dead. I dressed deliberately, choosing the navy dress Noel always said made me look dignified. If there was going to be a confrontation, I would meet it on my terms. They arrived right on time, Romy's heels clicking like a warning across the porch. I opened the door before they could knock, keeping the small advantage of being the hostess in my own home. "Good morning," I said pleasantly, as if this were a friendly visit. Romy swept past me, her designer purse clutched like a weapon. Wade followed, jaw tight. They stopped between me and the door, a subtle attempt at control. "Mom, I don't know what game you're playing," Wade began. "Tom says he won't give me any business information without your authorization." "What did you tell him?" I settled into Noel's favorite armchair, the one with the best view of the room. "I told him to follow proper procedures." "Your father would have expected that." "Proper procedures?" Romy's voice rose, sharp as glass. "Wade is Noel's son and heir." "What more authorization does anyone need?" "Legal authorization," I replied calmly. "The kind that comes with actual ownership." Wade's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Dad's will leaves everything to the family. I'm the executor. I handle the assets until probate is done." "Not quite," I said, reaching for the folder on the side table, the one Margaret Morrison had prepared. They both tensed as I opened it. "Your father's will covers his personal possessions and this house," I explained. "But Henderson Construction hasn't been part of his estate for 5 years." Wade's voice sharpened. "What are you saying?" I laid the trust papers on the coffee table between us. "Henderson Construction has belonged to the Henderson Construction Trust since 2019, I said evenly, "and I am the sole beneficiary of that trust." The room went silent except for the faint tick of the clock. For the first time, it was Wade and Romy who looked powerless. The silence that followed was absolute. Romy snatched the documents first, her manicured fingers trembling as she scanned the legal wording. Wade read over her shoulder, his face draining of color. "This can't be right," Romy whispered. "You've never even balanced a checkbook." "You're correct, Shaz," I said calmly. "Your father handled all of that, but it seems he understood our family dynamics far better than I realized." Wade sank onto the sofa, as if the floor itself had shifted. "But the business was struggling." Dad always said margins were tight. I slid another stack of papers across the coffee table. "The business has been profitable for years. These are the financial statements." Watching Wade's expression was like watching someone discover they'd been playing checkers while the rest of us played chess. "These profits," his voice was barely audible. "Where did the money go?" "Some of it went to you," I replied evenly. "Quite a lot, actually. $87,000 in loans over 5 years. Romy snatched the loan documents, scanning them in disbelief. "These say loans." "Wade, you told me they were gifts. You said your father was helping us get established." "They were gifts," Wade muttered, but there was no conviction in his voice. "Actually, they weren't," I said. "Margaret Morrison has detailed records of every conversation, every missed payment, every extension your father allowed." The realization settled over them like a heavy fog. Wade had built his plans on the assumption that his father's generosity would never end. "This doesn't change anything," Romy said suddenly, desperation sharpening her tone. "The house still goes to Wade. That's worth more than some little construction company." "Is it?" I asked mildly. Romy's eyes flashed. Don't play games. This property is worth at least $400,000. You're right. It's a lovely home. But there's the matter of the mortgage." Wade's head snapped up. "What mortgage?" "Dad said the house was paid off." "It was," I said, pulling another folder from the stack. "Until 18 months ago. Your father took out a home equity loan for $350,000. The proceeds were transferred into the Henderson Construction Trust. My inheritance." Romy went pale. "That's impossible. We would have had to sign something." "No," I replied evenly. "Your father was the sole owner at the time. My name carried survivorship rights, but not joint ownership. He needed no one else's signature." Wade stared at the papers as if they were written in another language. "Why would he do this? Why mortgage the house just to put money into a business account?" I let the emotion show at last. "Because he was protecting me, Wade. Protecting me from exactly this. Being treated as a burden and left with nothing while others claimed what they thought they deserved." Romy's composure cracked. "You manipulated him. You convinced a dying man to change everything." "Your father wasn't dying when he created these trusts," I said quietly. "He was planning. And the fact that he felt the need to plan should tell you something about how he viewed our family's dynamics." Wade's hands trembled as he set the papers down. "Mom, surely we can work something out. You don't want to manage a construction company in a house. This is our family home. It should stay in the family." "It is staying in the family," I replied. "It's staying with me." "But the mortgage payments," Romy said, her voice edging toward panic. "How will you afford them?" "The way your father intended, using income from Henderson Construction. Tom Bradley assures me the company is stable, and Margaret Morrison confirms the cash flow easily covers the loan and my living expenses." I stood smoothing the skirt of my navy dress. "Now, about moving out. You once suggested it to me. I still think it's an excellent idea. Not for me, of course, but I'm sure you'll find somewhere wonderful to start fresh." Wade looked up at me, eyes wide as if seeing me for the first time. "Mom, you can't be serious. Your father did everything for me," I said, cutting him off gently. "And now I intend to honor that." The clock on the mantel ticked softly as the weight of the truth settled over the room. An unmistakable ending to a game they thought they were winning. He loved me enough to make sure I'd never be at anyone's mercy, not even my own son's. And now I understand how much I needed that protection. Romy was already at the door, her face tight with fury. "This isn't over, Myrtle. We'll fight this. We'll contest everything. You're welcome to try," I said evenly. "But everything your father arranged is completely legal and fully documented. Margaret Morrison has already provided copies to my attorney." Wade paused, confusion and hurt flickering across his face. "I don't understand, Mom. Why are you doing this to us?" "I'm not doing anything to you," I replied. "I'm simply refusing to let you do it to me. When the door closed behind them, the house fell into a deep, peaceful quiet. My house. For the first time since I was a young woman, I was completely independent, owing nothing to anyone. Noel had given me more than money. He'd given me freedom. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of my new oceanfront cottage, the Pacific sun painting gold across the water. The steady crash of waves had become my daily music, replacing the creaks of the old family home. The Mendocino cottage was smaller, but every piece of furniture, every color on the walls, every detail reflected my taste alone. I discovered I had excellent taste when no one else was offering opinions. Henderson Construction continued to thrive under Tom Bradley's management. Each Friday, he called with updates, and each quarter profits flowed directly into my account. I had kept my promise to maintain the company exactly as Noel intended, and the team flourished. The cottage itself was one last gift. While reviewing the trust, Margaret had uncovered a deed Noel purchased 3 years earlier, with a note in his familiar handwriting. For Myrtle's retirement, when she's ready for ocean air and no schedule but her own. Even after death, Noel was still looking after me. This morning was special. My attorney, James Patterson, arrived right at 10, punctual as always. "Good morning, Myrtle," he said, settling into the chair by the window that had become his usual spot. "I have the final settlement for your review." I poured coffee from the French press I'd learned to master, a small, satisfying freedom, and joined him. "How did they take the final terms?" I asked. James's eyes held a trace of dry amusement. "About as well as you'd expect. Their lawyer argued that family obligations should outweigh business contracts, but the law is very clear." He handed me the agreement. After half a year of legal sparring, Wade and Romy had signed a plan acknowledging every dollar of the debt, now just over $96,000 with interest and penalties. They'd be paying for at least 8 years, and if they ever defaulted, the company could garnish wages and place liens on any property they bought. "We tried one last time to negotiate a family forgiveness clause," James added. "Wade even broke down, saying you were destroying your relationship with your only son over money. And you told them?" I reminded them, "My job is to protect your financial interests, not manage family relationships." Though I may have mentioned that most mothers don't have to sue their children to collect legitimate debts. He reached into his briefcase and produced a final envelope. "One more thing," he said, sliding it across the table. "This arrived for you yesterday." I took the envelope, the weight of Noel's quiet foresight still surrounding me like the ocean breeze. The envelope was addressed in Wade's familiar handwriting, inside a short note. "Mom, I know you may never forgive me for fighting you, but I finally understand what Dad was doing. It took losing almost everything for me to see how much I took for granted. Romy and I are in counseling. I'm working 2 jobs to meet the payment plan. I hope someday you'll talk to me again. I'm sorry for everything. Wade." I folded the letter and set it aside. The apology felt real, but it was 6 months late and born of consequences, not conscience. "Any response you'd like me to send?" James asked. "No," I said. "If Wade wants to rebuild our relationship, he can do it the same way he'll repay his debt, gradually, consistently, over time." After James left, I carried my coffee to the deck and read the letter once more. The grief was still there. Grief for Noel and for the son I thought I knew. But beneath it was something stronger, the quiet satisfaction of having stood up for myself when it mattered most. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize, though it felt familiar. "Mrs. Henderson?" "This is Linda Morrison, Margaret's daughter. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Of course not, dear. How can I help?" "Mom told me about your situation, how you rebuilt your life after family difficulties. I'm starting a support group for women who face financial manipulation by relatives. Would you share your story?" I hesitated. I'm not sure I'd know what to say. "You'd be surprised how many women need to hear it," she said gently. "Adult children who feel entitled to their parents' assets, spouses who hide money, people who mistake kindness for weakness. Your experience could give them courage." I thought of the pelican diving into the bay below. 6 months earlier, I'd been a grieving widow, nearly forced from my home. Now I was financially independent, living exactly where I wanted, beholden to no one. "When would you like me to speak?" I asked. "Really? You'll do it?" "I will. But not about revenge. I want to talk about the difference between being loving and being a doormat. About the importance of understanding your own finances. about the gift Noel gave me when he protected my future, even from our own son. We scheduled the talk for the following month. Helping other women felt like a purpose, a way to honor Noel's foresight and my own hard-won independence. That evening, I performed the ritual I'd come to cherish, sitting on my deck with a glass of wine, watching the sun sink into the Pacific. The ocean murmured against the rocks, steady and eternal. Wade's debt would be paid, whether through his effort or the legal safeguards in place. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was knowing I'd found the strength to demand respect and protect what was mine. I lifted my glass toward the horizon. "Thank you, Noel," I whispered. He had loved me enough to ensure I'd never be helpless, never dependent on anyone who saw me as expendable. When the test came, I had everything I needed to pass it. The sea kept its endless rhythm, and I sat in my own home on my own deck, finally understanding true freedom, never again begging for a seat at a table that should have been mine all along. Now I'm curious about you. Yes, you watching right now. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Share your thoughts in the comments so we can see how far this story reaches. And before you go, check out the 2 stories on screen. Viewer favorites filled with twists you won't expect. Thank you for staying with me until the very end.